As a project manager, you're given a bunch of money, you're given a bunch of time, and you're allowed to spend money on things and people to do something. And if you do something well, you get a bonus. If you do something badly, you get fired. And it's kind of I'm making it black and white, but a project manager isn't going to get into that detail. They're just going to go, scheduler, can you deal with that?
So, a project manager will know the scope of the project inside and out. While they may not know all the links and constraints, and are they using a 6-day calendar, a 7-day calendar, you will know the scope of the project. And that is your superpowers. That is where you should really be able to do some damage and focus in on where you can extract the most value through the planning and scheduling process. Every project manager loves the milestone variance. Here's your baseline. Here's your milestone. Here's the variance. Happy days. But you got to go down a level. And I would say get a subset of milestones and then a couple metrics that you track, some from the schedule, some from outside of the schedule, to make sure everything is going on that it's supposed to happening.
I will be given a date probably by my manager on when stuff needs to be done. And I need to take my own view of, have I been thrown under the bus here? Or is this actually a practical thing? If I've been thrown under the bus, was it overt? Like they knew they were throwing me under the bus. It was just, wait a minute, no one knew how difficult this was going to be. And we've just assumed a lot of things and we need to already re-baseline, blah, blah. So I'm trying to understand if I've got a landmine under me.
Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah, and I'm the CEO of Movar US, a project management consultancy.
And I'm Greg Lawton, the CEO of Nodes and Links, which is an AI schedule management company.
On this episode, we are talking to project managers. And what we're trying to distill is some tips, tricks, and tactics that project managers can use to understand scheduling. Now, schedulers that are out there listening, which is most of you, you can share this video with your project managers, or you can also stick around and listen to how we describe things so you can help train the trainer, aka your project manager. Greg, do you want to kick us off and maybe just tee us up where probably most project managers are sitting on their understanding of scheduling and planning and basically what their mindset is?
Got it. So most project managers aren't trained in any kind of professional schedule development or schedule management processes. It's learnt through the job. It's I've got scope to do, I've got schedule, I've got quality, I've got cost, I have risk, I have resources, I've got supply chain. Like they're trying to manage quite a lot of things. For me, I put this very simple framework around it, which is what really is a schedule in the head of a fast-moving delivery project manager. Well, a schedule really is two things. Number one is actually just a list of dates. I know we, as schedulers, we kind of focus on a lot of the complexity and the interconnectivity. It's just a list of milestones to a bunch of project managers and a list of dates by which something can be done. It's a calendar. And then number two is it's this complex what if thing of sequencing. So it's if I did that, then that, then that. And if I did this, I can do other things. And actually separating those two out actually starts conversations very, very well. It's, are you looking for a list of dates of something? Are you looking to understand how things crash and crack together? That's how I'd kind of start approaching the conversation.
Yeah, if I could put myself in most project manager shoes that I've experienced, I would say the same thing. I think there's a couple different variety of backgrounds, and I think it's important to talk about the background here so that way you know how to communicate and interact with them. If you go guns blazing in hot with a 3,000 page PDF and they have no idea what a schedule is, you're missing the mark. And so to understand that you probably have a swath of them that are from the construction management background. You have a swath of them that are engineers that got tired of being engineers that transferred over to project management. And like you said, there's probably not this big, huge education of planning and scheduling, which that's an opportunity for every planner and scheduler to help step in and educate their project manager, but do it in a way that meets them where they are. And I love how you said right at the beginning that they view it as a set of milestones, because to me, that's the quintessential place to start. You have a contract, it has some milestones in it. The project manager gets it, depending on the contract type, hands it over to the general contractor or the construction manager or whoever you're dealing with, and says, go build me that project. So let's just start, I guess. We'll go through the delivery phase, and maybe let's say we're in the early planning initiation phase. We got a level 1, level 2 schedule. How should a project manager view that point in time, as if they put their planner and scheduler hat on?
Do you know, I'm gonna say something that I don't think many people know on this. So I actually am in the second bucket of what you just said. I was actually an engineer who went over to project management, and I was actually a project manager for far longer than I was a scheduler. And I was taught scheduling because of there was two amazing people who I sat next to who were the schedulers, and I just became good friends with them. And I'd be going through it, but I was actually a project manager looking at this. At the start of the project, look, I kind of like to simplify all of this down to the brass tacks. As a project manager, you're given a bunch of money, you're given a bunch of time, and you're allowed to spend money on things and people to do something. And if you do something well, you get a bonus. If you do something badly, you get fired. And it's kind of, I'm making it black and white, but brass tacks level, it really is that black and white. And what you have is a bunch of very deep domains that you can't go to the bottom of because of all the requirements a large organization will have. It's like, oh, you must do critical path method planning and you must have certain health criteria. A project manager isn't going to get into that detail. They're just going to go, scheduler, can you deal with that? Just like they'll go, cost manager, can you deal with that? And their job is to stitch something together and make sure there aren't any crazy red flags. At the start of the process, really, what the kind of the scheduler is doing is two things. One is it's sitting in between the scope and the people. Because it's, as a project manager, I'm going to have to write a requisition to say, I need Bob, James, Dave, and Leanna. And I need them on these
Don't
days
forget
to do
Leanna.
stuff. Yeah, well, it's just, I need people and materials delivered places for people to do stuff. So I'm kind of like, who am I requesting? That's a big consideration, and I need to know what the tasks are and things like this. So the engineer needs to communicate the task. We've got to figure out with the construction and the superintendents how they're going to get done and like what the time periods are, so that then I can go off and request people and materials. So that's number one. Number two is looking at, I will be given a date probably by my manager on when stuff needs to be done. And I need to take my own view of, have I been thrown under the bus here? Or is this actually a practical thing? Like, can I deliver this? If I've been thrown under the bus, was it overt? Like they knew they were throwing me under the bus. So I need to have that comment. Or it was just, wait a minute, no one knew how difficult this was going to be. And we've just assumed a lot of things and we need to already re-baseline, blah, blah. So I'm trying to understand if I've got a landmine under me. Because again, my job as a project manager would just be get a bunch of people to use a bunch of things and a bunch of processes to get a bunch of stuff done by a certain time at a certain cost so that I can move on to doing the next thing.
Yeah, I would if at that early project planning phase, what I typically see people do is go too slow out of the gates. You know,
Hmm.
this is not a race, like a running race. You're not trying to save a kick for the end. You're much better just start out sprinting as hard and as fast as you can, trying to, like you said, you don't know what you've been given. And a lot of people will create take the contract. Oh, I got the milestones. And, in a couple of weeks, we'll kick off the design. And a couple of weeks, I'll file the permit. In a couple of weeks, and we're all good and everything is grand, but they actually don't start laying that out and start really looking at what are the big rocks in front of them,
Hmm.
because then they end up tripping over all of that later on. And if you don't get out of the gates quickly, build that plan and start testing and figuring out where all the issues are, that's where they compound downstream and you have less options to go figure them out. So the number one thing for me is I don't really care how you do it. Put it in a spreadsheet, hire a scheduler, do whatever.
Hmm.
Just flush that thing out as much as possible, because you're probably taking in assumed durations, right? Hey, the
Hmm.
last project did it in 12 months, 18 months. Well, I just put that in for my construction timeline. You're building in a new location with a new labor force and you have nothing there. How does that relate back to those 18 months you just saw? And by getting all of that in early, you can have all the hard conversations with management about rebaselining and about replanning and needing more money and this and that. And then you can actually go focus on delivering the job. Versus if you don't have those conversations early because you didn't lay out that plan, then that's much harder when it's down the road.
No, you've just made me think about a question that schedulers can ask project managers that will actually, to me, would have improved a lot of relationships and workflows, because each project manager is a little different, because these people have weight on their shoulders, like real weight of delivery, where if they don't deliver, there's big consequences. Different people will have different risk appetites. So, for example, some project managers will want to get out the gate as fast as possible with everything. Some project managers will want to plan it in detail. Some project managers will look for a bit in the middle. Some project managers will immediately go to the contract and see like what games they can play. Like, there's a lot of ways of doing project management, and I think one of the best things a scheduler could do in the early phases of the project is to ask probing questions to figure out who they're talking with. So, for example, be like, if I was to create you a schedule, would you like it to be the most detailed schedule possible so that we can do all of this analysis? Or would you like it to be just in your inbox as fast as possible with the major milestones?
Now, remember, you did it. We were supposed to, this episode for the project managers. And there you go, talking back to the schedulers. So we
Mm-hmm.
got to slightly modify that question. I think it's the same thing, but it's just the project manager asking to the scheduler, listen, scheduler, right now we're going to just take the 18-month construction that we had agreed to. We're going to revisit that in a little bit. But what I need to do is really start fleshing out design timelines. Can you go look at the past 4 projects with these design companies we used? And did any of them actually finish the design when they said they were going to? Hey,
Got
can
it.
we
So,
start
yeah.
looking at these permit timelines, please? And I want this laid out, in a spreadsheet, whatever you can do, right? Like I just is company to company, but that's where I would start pushing my scheduler. Come bring that back to me, and then we're going to have that discussion on risk.
You're spot on there. I think to flip it around the other way, what I'd say is that project managers need to be incredibly specific with the document that they're asking the scheduler to produce. And I say document because scheduling is fundamentally, to the outside world, a delivery function, as in you produce documents. Even if it's like an analysis and scenarios, it's still documents. It's exactly what you're asking them to produce, because generally you'll get exactly what you're asking for. So, for example, in your scenario that you were just talking about, I want to go flesh out this early stage and do that. What you're saying is, I want a detailed early delivery plan that has been benchmarked against 4 other projects that we've done. And I want to understand variances that have happened in other 4 projects that could potentially impact this, that push our dates out. Now, that is a very, very specific schedule and a very specific document that they can ask for.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's shift gears just a little bit. Pre-planning went amazing because the project manager listened to beyond deadlines. took our advice. And now they're rolling into, and I think this will be a little bit more applicable for a lot more project managers, because then we can dive into like basically like a general contractor project manager and an owner project
Hmm.
manager, kind of the same thing. Let's try and tackle them both at the same time. But to me, in either case, as you start to roll into, let's say, real construction, no offense to our design team out there.
Well, design is real design. Construction is real construction.
Hey, there
It's
we
fine.
go. There we go.
Yeah.
We're all friends and family here. But let's say you're eking towards that point. My thought process for a project manager and where I see a biggest gap is, cost kind of just makes sense as the job goes. It's almost like going
Hmm.
into a grocery store with cost. Like I get the milk, I go to the counter, I put the milk on, they say it's $2.30 or whatever it is now. I don't drink real milk, so this is a terrible price example. But you pay for it, you leave, right? In scheduling, it's a little bit different because there are those contract points, but I feel like there's much more of a system to set up, almost like a health and safety program versus a cost program, but they're usually treated like a cost program, not the health and safety program. And so if I was talking to a project manager about, hey, how are you going to knock this out of the park? It's like before you move into bringing that GC on board, or if you are on that GC team board, thinking about this is like, how is the system going to work, right? Because you're going to have lots of different parties now providing you data, updating your schedule. You're going to get that schedule and you're going to want to know, going back to our early points, are milestones on time? Is the schedule still predictable? And how that whole system functions. And I just don't necessarily see that happening because they'll give a boilerplate contract that may or may not have scheduling requirements in it. And then they'll just kind of roll on like, oh, every month this is supposed to be done in happy days, versus putting the time in up front to understand here's a strong specification. We're going to be meeting bi-weekly for progress updates. Every month is the detailed report. I want to see these 5, 6 things, like let's go do this, and really taking the bull by the horns.
Do you know, it made me think of a slight analogy, and I'll just digress for a second. So, my father worked in banking, and he actually worked in the back end like of all the systems, as in making sure payments and transactions worked during the 2009 financial crisis. And when everything collapsed, there were really two things that were missing from the system. One was checks and balances to stop people giving out ridiculous mortgages. So it was getting lost. And the second was the recovery function. So, you had these huge hedge funds buying 10,000 mortgages, and they didn't have a single person who had the experience and the kind of know to go and reclaim the houses when people didn't pay. So, like when you default, it's like they were just trading them as assets as opposed to actual things you need to manage. And the reason I use that as an example here, it's exactly what you said. You and I actually have seen a lot of companies that will not put checks and balances around core things like the schedule, and then will not have the capability to be able to go in and start to help or recover when things are starting to go wrong. And they are actually very specific skill sets in them.
Yeah. Great point on skill sets. I think that's the other side of the coin, is a project manager is an accumulator of talent.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're best to find the best talent you possibly can for that role. And it's a critical role. And I think there's different, levels and roles and how many people you bring on. But if you're gonna skimp on your cost estimator, don't skimp on your scheduler. I'm just kidding. No, but I think that's the other piece of it to me is in that phase, you're looking at the talent that your subcontractors are bringing to the table. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into like a dispute essentially between a GC and a subcontractor, and I'm the owner, and they're like, come on, Micah, like help us play nice. And you find out that the subcontractor has this like overwhelming talent for scheduling, and the GC is just simply not even using it. And you're like, oh, okay, why not? Because the scheduler for the GC isn't that talented and can't figure out the simple way just to pull the schedule in. So I'd say that's the
Mm-hmm.
other part in that early kind of progressing stage is finding that talent and then really leveraging it as much as possible. And that talent comes, folks, in a variety of different ways. I think, yeah, there is the on-site scheduler, but turns out to get top talent, they may not want to move to Timbuktu. No offense to anybody in Timbuktu, or different places. Like you may have to figure out what is that, middle ground. When I first started at Google, we just had consultants flying to the projects and reviewing them once a month. And it worked really, really well. They spent a week there. They deep dived with the team. We got a really good sense of where the project was. And then they flew out. That's something that I think most people are like, I just have to have that on-site scheduler, but then you have a talent disparity there. So I think that, focusing on what is your talent structure is going to impact down the road. Okay, let's take another. Oh,
But just before we go on, let's break that down to a lower level, because we want even more actionable techniques and advice for project managers here. What I'd say is, I'm just going to list a number of tasks that you could get a scheduler to do when you're interviewing. You could kind of probe in these. So in the early days, we've talked about schedule creation. That's actually a skill set in itself, because really that's about liaising with the engineering team and the commercial team and the cost team to actually understand and build a whole bunch of scenarios to get to some kind of baseline point. You can actually just get schedule creation specialists, though a lot of schedulers can create a schedule. Like you can tell from what I just said, there's different levels of skill set there. Then when you're on the job, you've got the people who can track progress. So this is really about reading the schedule, understand what's supposed to happen. And essentially what they do is they keep the schedule up to date, like really up to date about what's going on. Then you have the people who perform the analysis. And the analysis can be anything from reporting, as in standard reporting in progress, into things like what you talked about, extension of time claims. You've got disruption claims, early dispute resolution, risk analysis, change analysis. You've got kind of all of those processes that go on. And for example, you and I know the best change analysts or the best dispute analysts actually don't really need to be on site. They need a very good updated schedule from which to do a lot of maths on, and then they'll just tell you. So this is why I was saying it's a separate thing. So, if you're dependent on what your strategy is about different things, if you expect a lot of change to come through or change to be critical to the success of your project, then maybe you need a very good on-site updater that flies in or whatever, and then you actually have specialist skills that you draw down on in order to give you those kinds of, like, if you try and get everything under one roof, the likelihood that you're going to be able to afford it, because if someone's doing top class updated and top class change, they're probably not sleeping and they're probably charging you a good $500,000, $1 million. But if you separate it, you can start to get, division of labor. But then that comes down to management of people. You need to be able to understand that these processes roll together and how to kind of trigger them off. Like I said, it's not complicated. It'd be around schedule specifications, GC working groups, on-site visits, all of these kinds of things. Then into cyclical processes, so either bi-weekly, weekly, monthly, whatever. Separate ones for change and disputes. They're kind of like trigger points. And then you all have ones around the schedule creation. When change comes through and rebaselining happens, you'll need someone who can do schedule scenarios and creation experts. So I'd kind of separate it into all of those buckets.
Yeah. One of the other things, I had a brilliant project manager, and she would drop in at the very beginning. She was in every meeting to make sure it was set up and she understood what was going on in the meetings. This is the schedule progress meeting. This is the change log meeting. And then as she would drop in to meetings as she could. And so you didn't know if she was going to be there or not, but it was functioning without her, and she was getting the updates out of it. And so I feel like that early investment in understanding how the system's set up and is it working properly and functioning is super key for project managers. And then you can actually understand what's going on, and then they get a pull back out. The other one is, to me, when you start getting into that progress mode and that baseline mode, you have to be able to understand at what point I'm going to slam on the brakes and say, I'm not paying you any more money until the baseline's done. That's a tough one that I don't see, a lot of in that sort of cycle, is trusting, understanding what your scheduler is giving you, trusting it, and realizing that if you go any further without an updated schedule and a baseline or whatever it's going on, that is a big issue. Let's just kind of, to bring this one home, let's close on kind of reporting and outputs and all those other sorts of things. One thing that sparked my brain when you were talking, when I was thinking about, okay, we have a progressing system and all that, I will give my always disclaimer, right? Don't forget commissioning. Make sure you plan that way out ahead of time. Make sure you know how you integrate with your commissioning software and don't leave that to the end. That plug aside, I always thought that, from a project manager standpoint, you may not understand what the heck's going on in the schedule, but you can assemble different data points to help you understand it. So for example, like, maybe you don't feel very comfortable with the schedule, but most people feel comfortable with quantities. So make sure you set up quantities and kind of triangulate it so you can, how are we doing on steel? So that way, if they say we're 75% done, you're 25% done on the quantity of steel installed, big problem, right? I think there's other metrics you can set up to look for outside of just your milestone variances. I get it. Every project manager loves the milestone variance. Here's your baseline. Here's your milestone. Here's the variance. Happy days. But you got to go down a level. And I would say get a subset of milestones and then a couple metrics that you track, some from the schedule, some from outside of the schedule, to make sure everything is going on that it's supposed to happening. Because if you don't, and you're just relying on either, oh, hey, I'm just tracking like, I don't know, people through the gate or something like that, but not really looking at the schedule, or vice versa, you're just going to end up in an intersection where you're going to get into trouble and you're not going to know how to fix it.
I'd build on that and probe into the scheduler skills. So you and I have talked in previous episodes about scheduling being a very mathematical subject, but actually project management is a social science and you need to be able to kind of communicate and build it up. Like if I'm interviewing a scheduler and I'm saying, okay, I need reports, help me. And the first set of questions out of their mouth isn't, well, what are you trying to achieve? What are you doing? If the first statement's out of there, let me tell you about the Power BI system that I'm going to put in place, immediately reject. Like, and I'm sorry for the schedulers here, but it's like, do not care about the pretty system you've built in the background that makes things possible. I care about the product that I get. So, I don't care how amazing McDonald's kitchens are. I care that burger tastes nice and I get it real quick. So on the reporting, I'd be like, to your point, a really, really good scheduler can come to you and be like, well, this is the report I've used in the last 3 projects. Let me walk you through it. Tell me what you want to change. And then you tell me what you're looking for.
Yeah. I think that is a perfect way to summarize it. I think there's a different billion ways you can go, which I kind of blabbed about right before you said, but I think kind of pushing your scheduler as well into a different comfort zone and pulling information, together. And then I would say, yeah, just being really clear. Is this an executive level report? So I just need to say a couple lines at the monthly meeting to the VP about where the project at. Is this, or on the one side of the scale, on the other side of the scale, is this me digging down into the weeds, trying to figure out some detailed site information? And I think those, in 2 different scales or 2 different requests, and, teeing those up correctly for the project manager to help communicate that clearly to the scheduler is super, super important.
I think as well, because we're talking here about commissioning and there's an entire closeout part here to scheduling, and every project manager will know this, that the project isn't finished until either you get another job and you manage to ditch it and move on, or you have to actually go through the closeout period, at which point the schedule falls into, and the reports that come out of it fall into 2 categories. One is reports that you can actually use to do things on a day-to-day, a month-by-month basis. And the second is things that might turn up in court at some point. So you're going to need to really start hammering on the contractual requirements in terms of schedule quality, schedule submission, on-timely submission, schedule updates, these kinds of things, so that as you kind of approach that finish point,
and I would just
head into this dispute.
Yeah, and I would just add the project manager's superpower is scope. So project manager will know the scope of the project inside and out. And so while they may not know all the links and constraints, and are they using a 6-day calendar, a 7-day calendar, you will know the scope of the project. And that is your superpower. So finding the scope out and where the scope goes, and they're pretty strong about the sequencing of the scope. That is where you should really be able to do some damage and focus in on where you can extract the most value through the planning and scheduling process.
It's funny. I actually see the commissioning phase from a project management perspective as that is actually the real sprint, not the sprint to finish the project, but it's almost like, and I'm using a lot of analogies today. It's like if I was decorating my room downstairs and I took an age to take up the floor and lay down some nice wooden floor, and then we took an age to paint it because there's only one window, and I was taking a bit of time. But then it's like, okay, it's ready, but it's not ready. I have to put in the IKEA furniture, which I have to disassemble. So I have to, put some nice decorations, even just hammer paint, like put paintings on the wall. And it's like, okay, well, it's not finished until it's finished, and it has to be precise. And it's the same thing here. There'll be lots of mess happening in the project and lots of mess happening in the schedule, but you need to hammer towards getting it polished and finished. And one of the ways of doing that is actually asking the scheduler, is that period closed? Or is that part closed? Now, what I mean by that is, for example, if we look back 2 months, are all actuals and all scope that was delivered locked and updated in the schedule and won't be moving? Because you and I have seen this where there'll be things that are just not updated, and we're like, oh, we'll update it next month because of reason X, and it just becomes really untidy. And oh, that change went in, but I didn't remove, and I've now got 7,000 archived tasks that are not linked, and it's like you have to clean it up as you go along.
If it were me, I would get this massive board, and I might even put it like right when you enter the job site, and I'd have all of the tags for all of the equipment on one side and a couple bigger ones that say system. And literally every day I would just go out and I would move the tags over to what has been completed. Because I don't know, on a data center job, you're going to end up with, depending on your equipment, less than 1,000 tags probably. I don't know, depending how deep you go and what you consider tags, all that stuff. There's some variation there. But it is amazing to me, if you don't have strong scheduling skill set, that a GC would put all of those tags in Primavera P6, which is going to create a conundrum in and of itself because it's a gateway where no one can access it and things are happening every day.
No one can see it. No one understands it. Just put a board.
And what's even more mind-boggling is when an owner requests the GC to do that, to like put all their stuff in that. I mean, that's also one to me where it's, you're just shooting yourself in your foot. But I think understanding that tag tracking is just a burn down is where I would head as a project manager, because it simplifies what you're chasing after. Because at a certain point, all those tags pretty much need to be done to move along. And it's a good measure of, are you getting this stuff done? And it kind of unites everybody and it gets everybody focused on the right thing. And then, I've been on projects where, it's like a month to go and we still don't know how many tags we have on the project. And you're like, this is crazy. And I think that's where this one gets interesting because, you've hired a planner and scheduler to build a construction project. But when you transfer into that commissioning phase, it's a different beast and a different bear. And maintaining that integration while also efficiently executing commissioning is a challenge. I mean, I just made a post on it the other week and it was amazing across all industries, except for maybe like nuclear shutdowns. Everybody's like, yeah, this is a problem. And it's tough. And that's why I said at the very, very beginning, I put that plug in. If I was a project manager, I would try and figure that out day one. That would be one of my first things that I would go sort out is how are we
That's a good way about thinking, like the end point. How am I going to commission and work back from this? Yeah. Do you know what you just made me think? And maybe this, this is coming from a guy who's made his money, his fortune in maths and scheduling. I have actually thought this quite a few times. Software didn't exist before about 1990, 1980 in scheduling. And somehow the world got built. And computers didn't exist really before like 1970 on widespread. And somehow the world got built and wars got won and nuclear bombs got built and all of this. And I'm like, part of me just thinks sometimes just doing the most basic, stupid thing possible might actually just be the best thing. So, for example, just have a big board with markers and move them.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
and then just have a security guard standing next to it who hits someone with a stick if they're not authorized to move
Okay,
it.
now you've gone too far. Now you've gone too far. I'm not
I don't
condoning
know.
someone
All right,
being
you have a little
sick.
barrier so people can't move, but it's just as simple as that. And like, yeah, like don't get me wrong, you have to do on big projects, you have to do proper schedules and you have to
I
do the
mean,
maths
dude, how
associated with it.
cool
But
would
there's a
it
lot
be
of
if it was
simple
like
stuff.
$1 or $5, right, into a jar, and
Hmm.
it's like you have one jar, and every single time a tag gets done, the person takes the dollar, moves in another jar. You know what I mean? And then at the end, you take the money and go throw like a company something or a site something.
Mm.
It's just so strange to me that this process has now been completely overcomplicated, completely overdone, and it's made to seem like there's some great mysticism about it, and it's really not. It's like you got some stuff, you try and turn it on. When you turn it on, you need to make sure that stuff works, and if it does, you get a thumbs up, right? You have X amount of thumbs ups to go do depending on what you're setting up, and every single time, it's not every single time, a lot of times it's saved to the very end. You don't plan it out. You don't flesh out how this is going to work. You don't go look at, okay, X amount of tags for electrical, mechanical, fire safety. And then the system you go put in is either nothing. Like, I mean, for Google for a while, we just used an Excel spreadsheet. And then, or it's ridiculously overcomplicated. You paid, there's another company where you paid like, millions of dollars for this commissioning software. And I mean, who knows? Like, it's not really that much better than the spreadsheet, and you've like completely missed the point of like, how many tags do we have and where were we at on the tags? So project
Do you know
managers
what? Do you know? I'll leave one
focus.
final. I'll leave one final thought here. Is actually something from defense because I learned project management and scheduling in defense, and when I did nuclear subs, so that is you're turning on a nuclear reactor, like these kinds of things, and you're also trying to, you know, turn on a bunch of computers that fire missiles, and you don't accidentally want them firing missiles and this kind of stuff. And
It's a James
the
Bond.
actual commissioning team actually had full rigs of the command suite that they would practice from about a third to a halfway into the job, so that by the time it came to actually doing it on the live asset, they've actually done it about 15 times and they know the timings, they know the switch on, they know the processes. And it's like, it's like one of those Formula One pit stops where they just know you get the wheel, like, and it's that practice. And I kind of think about this where when you're talking about hot projects, like projects where time really does matter, like data centers, chip fabs, to some extent pharma, like government projects aren't really hot projects generally because, to be honest, no one really gets fired if the thing goes over and costs 10 billion more. Let's be honest, like someone gets a slap, but it's not the
Unless
same
you're
as
in
in
America now.
private sector. But I don't understand why people don't have more rigs. Maybe it's a long lead item thing. I don't know, but it's like, why don't you have a commissioning team practicing all the time and you fly that commissioning team to every single project and you just get them to do it? I don't know. Maybe I'm oversimplifying.
I mean, a little bit. I think we, have tried it at places. I think, a lot of companies will hire third party agents to do the commissioning, and then it
Yeah.
adds one more, it's like when you outsource your design, now you have an owner, a designer, and a GC, and they all have to play nice. I think that's a piece of it. A lot of it is just mostly speculation on my part because, I've overseen quite a few commissioning jobs, but I wouldn't consider myself a commissioning agent. I think there is a giant piece of it that perfect gets in the way of good. And so
Mhm.
everybody wants to wait till they have the exact component list and everything exactly down before they go in and try and figure out like what the plan is. But I think like you're saying, I mean, I gotta imagine that most of these jobs that I've done, it follows in this data center space a very similar step and process. Like you need power, you need water, and a lot of these things, are you going to use temporary power, then switch over to permanent power? A lot of teams make that decision very, very late. I mean, most jobs is really efficient to just start on temporary power as your plan and then switch over to permanent power later. And so I do think that's possible. And I do think I think overall, what you're mentioning is a massive, massive, massive value add that people just haven't bought into yet. I think you can do that on so many different applications where you pilot something and test something outside of the crunch time to get value out of it. Number one favorite thing is software. I love it slash hate it. I actually hate it. I don't love it, but it's hilarious to me when companies will buy like the massive ERP system, and then they'll literally pilot it on their next project that's coming up. This happened at Intel, and it just made me, I was so confused when this happened, when we paid millions of dollars for an ERP system. And I'm like, hey, listen, we have like 4 historical projects and monthly updates and designs and everything we would need to pilot this software out. Why wouldn't we just do it on the historical, works out all the bugs and kinks? Plus, with all that the big PM ERP systems, it's all custom at the end of the day. They say it comes in a shell, but then you add in all the stuff you want. It's all custom. So like build all the custom reports ahead of time, and it like, what I said fell on deaf ear. No, why would we do that? We just want to do it on a live project. And then, I don't think we actually went forward on that one, but it is the strangest thing. All right. Hopefully, project managers, you've gotten a lot out of these ramblings today. Schedulers, hopefully you got some techniques to help walk your project manager through and talk them through some of the issues. Remember, I think one of the biggest ones is be sure you meet them where they are. Okay. They're not scheduling experts. And oftentimes you just need to explain it in a way that will make sense to them. Greg, any final thoughts before we jump?
I think that specifically talking to the project managers here, a lot of the project managers that have been in the business more than a couple of years will totally get this point and understand it. It's generalized, it's about the people, but actually it's about the specificity. Everything that we've actually talked about for schedulers here, about there's different flavors, there's different skill sets at different parts of the job, and you have to be specific, actually carries over to cost and to risk and to the engineering teams. And these, if you get it, there are some specifics. So knowing, for example, that a disruption analysis is different than reporting. So that there's some specifics there. But actually what we're talking about here is really top level people management around complex project management. And I think that a lot of people can just kind of nod on that. So I'd say the things to take away are actually the specifics of the situation, and maybe take the idea of putting some rigs together and practicing permissioning before you try it. We went off tangent there, but yeah, you and I have seen some bombs blow up.
Rig it up. You know what? Or just like my man Bill O'Reilly used to say, do it live. All right, folks, that's us at Beyond Deadlines. If you could, I say this every week, and it would help us so much out if you could hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on YouTube, if you're listening on a podcast, share it with your coworkers. This is a perfect episode to share with a project manager to get them starting to understand scheduling more and to dive more into it. But for us on Beyond Deadlines, we wish you the best one, and we'll see you next week.